If we can imagine being there at the crucifixion and seeing the very face of Jesus as he went through his passion for our salvation, it would be a very fascinating thing. In fact, this is what we do in our mind and heart every year as we go through the stations of the cross during Lent. We contemplate what happened to Jesus as he was mocked, beaten, and crucified, as all the crowds and even his mother watched all of these events unfold. He was crucified for being a straight talking moral voice in front of all of the people, but also on the other side of things, showing mercy to sinners whose hearts were crushed because of their sins. And finally, proclaiming the truth that he is God. And all of this culminates in the Son of God offering for all time a single sacrifice for sins, where he willingly went to the cross for you and for me. Imagine watching this historical event of which we read year after year from those eyewitness accounts and their testimony, and we are really meant to be drawn into the event and even participate in it by experiencing God's salvation in the sacraments, which receive their saving power from the blood that was outpoured from Christ on the cross. And as we all, as Christians, learn to lay down our life for each other in imitation of Christ. In thinking this way, it helps us grasp our first reading, where the early church fathers and the apostles saw Christ. His very face matched the words as they pored over the Old Testament readings. Now, the author most likely was writing about normal, just men who weren't perfect, but nonetheless became holy by God's grace and confronted sin and evil within the Jewish culture, where wicked people despised the prophets and the priests for telling them about their sins and how their holy lives were obnoxious to their sinful lives. So they wanted to kill them. In fact, this is why people usually kill saints in history. They preach Christ's holiness by their lives and confront the world's sin. This is part of the Christian mission to expose the works of evil in the world for the cause of truth and justice. But the early Christians understood rightly that there is only one real just one, Jesus Christ. And this passage spoke in detail about the face of Jesus before the Sanhedrin, or the Jewish court that had religious, civil, and criminal jurisdiction during the Second Temple Judaism. For it gives a clear picture of what happened that day as the just one was condemned to death. The evil thoughts that went through their minds and hearts were these: with revilement and torture, let us put the just one to the test, that we may have proof of his gentleness and try his patience. Let us condemn him to a shameful death, for according to his own words, God will take care of him. And this is exactly what God did in Christ. He took care of him. For in the mystery of the incarnation, God took on a full human nature and revealed to us the resurrection to life, to never fear dying for a just cause, to never fear speaking the full moral truth on an issue, and to have faith God will take care of us. For death is not what we ultimately fear as Christians, but the second death or eternal separation from God. And it is important to note, it's not the eternal fire of hell that's the worst thing in and for human beings, but it's doing something morally wrong with no remorse, no contrition, no desire to change, or rationalizing around the obvious moral failure to try to justify yourself as Christ hangs on the cross for the very thing you try to justify yourself for. The death of Christ marks a definitive moment in history where truth, righteousness, and sin are definitively defined by God's Son, who's not trying to argue with the human race and its sin, but he seeks to save it through the richness of his mercy and grace. This is why God gave the church the sacraments. They are remedies for sin, especially the sacrament of confession, which is for normal, honest people who desire mercy. And these are the effects of a worthy confession, which you can find in Jordan Almond's book in Spiritual Theology. And he says, first, the blood of Christ falls upon the soul to purify it and sanctify it. Second, grace is increased in the soul. Thirdly, the soul is filled with peace and consolation. Fourthly, a greater light is given in how to follow God in his ways. And lastly, it increases the power of the soul by imparting energy and strength to conquer temptations and the fortitude to fulfill one's duties well.